I've had the company for 11 years now. Started out kind of freelancing on a very kind of limited basis, working for a store part-time, working freelance part-time, working as a tailor part-time, and kind of grew into finally making it my full-time employment, which is awesome. I work with a lot of small brands, which kind of organically led me into the sustainable fashion space, just working for small and local companies, concerned about money, but also sustainable materials, or how to cut more sustainably in their product development. So we do services from design, tech packs, pattern making, prototyping, and then help match make and navigate the world of production a little bit when clients are first starting out and getting to know their factories, helping them make choices in their businesses. And it's really great to work with like-minded companies that have this in mind for themselves.
Awesome. All right, I'll pass it over to Lindsay.
All right, thanks. My name is Lindsay Strange. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I teach apparel design. Before I was a teacher, I've worked in the apparel industry as a designer and a technical designer, anywhere from theater to mass production. Ooh, I'm stuck in my necklace. And all throughout it, I kind of self-educated myself about sustainability. It kind of came from a just personal love of nature and environmentalism and generally thriftiness. I got into clothing because I love making stuff and sewing and doing things really hands-on. And as I got into my career, it kind of, the whole mass-produced way of things being made kind of just got to me from that level. And then the more I learned about it, the more I started to care about ways we could do the industry in a better way. So I try to do that through my teaching. And recently I went back to school and got an MBA in sustainability so that I could understand the business side as well as the creative design side. Because I see a lot of research and so, entrepreneurs and things starting up and not always getting where they want to get because they don't understand how to fit into the system or to effectively change it. So I'm still working on how to bring that into design education, but that's one of my big goals. Excited. Else here?
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Teresa, we'll pass it to you.
Sure. First thing, I want to thank you, Ashlyn, for putting all of this together. I know this is a lot of work, and I'm pretty excited about how it's manifested in this digital way where people who couldn't have necessarily come and joined in person were able to participate. So thank you for your efforts. I am Teresa Vandermeer. I'm a social entrepreneur, and that means that I believe business can be a force for good. So I'm interested in combining the virtues and the goals of the nonprofit world with the economies of scale and efficiencies of the business world. And for me, that manifests right now at Work Shelter. Work Shelter is an ethical cut and sew factory that I founded in Delhi. We employ over 40 women in need, and we just celebrated our 8-year anniversary. So, toast to that. And we work with, thank you. We work with designers, we work with promotional products companies, we work with big box retailers to bring forth apparel and accessories that are consciously made. And so for me, I started Work Shelter specifically because I had met women in need in Delhi who were just like, we got a lot of stuff going on, but would really help us is some cash. And so that's why I decided to start this organization. And so, my understanding of the need for organizations like Work Shelter has evolved over the years. As I said, it was started to support women in need, but it became increasingly clear to me after spending a lot of time in India and seeing the negative consequences that development and manufacturing was having on the environment that we needed to think deeply about our supply chain. And that really was a domino effect for me and thinking about how can we be a better, more conscious company overall. So excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And congratulations on your anniversary. What a gift.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Ashley, we'll round it out.
Yeah. So firstly, thank you so much again, Ashlyn, for organizing this. I echo everything that Teresa and everyone else has said. This is a huge undertaking to pivot an event that was in person to this. I can only, stressful enough for me to hop on a Zoom call sometimes. So I can't imagine how you made it all work, but you did, and it's awesome. So, hey, I'm Ashley Piper. I am a sustainability expert. I am also a journalist and a TV personality focusing on eco-friendly living. I'm the author of this book, Give a Shit, do good, live better, save the planet. I actually don't know if it kind of inverts the copy when you do it that way. But yeah, oh, and you've got your my God, raise your copy. Thanks, Teresa. How nice. My path was kind of not a monolithic one. I was a political strategist for a decade. And I was working with a lot of politicians, many of whom I never got to choose who my clients were, because I was at a firm for a lot of that time. And I became really interested personally in sustainability and had kind of my own journey. And through that, I was thinking, I had like maybe a late onset quarter life crisis or an early onset midlife crisis where I was like, holy crap, I need to be doing something that actually, like, I need to be parlaying this skill set into the causes that I actually care about and the causes that really need that signal boosting out there in the world anyway. So sustainability, chief among those. So I pivoted my career, and now I do this. I get to talk with people about making sustainable living, more affordable, more convenient, kind of bucking all of those stereotypes that have, I think, impeded people from actually wanting to live in a more sustainable way for a really long time. Mm-hmm. So fashion isn't my sole focus, as you can tell by the sweatshirt I'm wearing right now. But I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you guys as well, because you're the experts in this area. But I really love being able to talk with people and to write pieces that educate the mainstream just about how easy and also how important it is to live in more sustainable ways.
Yeah, that's an equally important piece of the puzzle. And so we're grateful that you're here to provide that perspective. Before we dig into like a full conversation mode, I want to kind of touch on the design process and sort of where sustainability and ethics sort of fits in the production of clothing and how that all kind of impacts the work that each one of you are doing. And so I want to start with social to talk a little bit about like walking us through the process of making clothes, the production that you take designers through, and maybe some areas that you really focus on when you're thinking about sustainability or you're encouraging designers to produce in certain ways. Would love to just like get a quick walkthrough of what that process looks like.
Sure. Thank you. Sure. So any design process starts with the idea, the concept, and some designers have a very strong vision for the overall direction, whether that's how it's manufactured or what types of materials. Some just, they have an image or a few images in their head or on paper that they want to do, and they don't really know where to go from there. So we work with people on kind of all levels and help them to refine the design, define it by what is the material, help them make choices, what's going to achieve the best results, depending on how many things they want to manufacture. That's always an early conversation. It's like, how do you want to manufacture? How many do you think you want to make? How many do you think you can sell? Is obviously an important correlation there. So that we can kind of steer them towards, maybe it's a fair trade factory, maybe it's a larger domestic made in USA factory, maybe it's a smaller kind of mom and pop type of shop where it's a collective of seamstresses who are working together. There's different levels of production that can work for various levels of business, and also what kind of product they're making as well. I used to be very heavily in like an activewear stretch knit space, and since I've gone more into sustainable and eco-friendly materials, a lot more of that's wovens, or even the knits are just not like athletic knits necessarily as much. So it's been an interesting journey from my perspective as well. But I've visited so many factories throughout the country. I've not yet gone international, but hopefully one day I'm going to go to India and see Teresa's factory. I'm really excited to do that. However, I've gotten to see virtually kind of how it works and learn through her. And getting to know the sewers, the floor managers, all the people involved has really helped me to kind of do the matchmaking and get people into the right space. So kind of backing up back into the design process, we source materials. Primarily, since I am working with smaller companies, we're sourcing materials that are available either in stock, dead stock, or by a jobber. or sometimes they're custom made, but usually it's something that's like available and they're able to do something with it. Maybe they're dyeing it or maybe they're customizing it in some way. Then we go through kind of the technical design, measurements. A lot of times I'm thinking through how best to utilize their material. Sometimes I've had situations where, for example, a dress we made for one client had a really beautiful kind of feathered fabric as the part of the skirt. It was such a wide skirt though, we had this like very small panel left over after cutting it. And of course we don't want to waste that. So rather than, you know, saving it for something in the future, or rather than like letting that kind of go to waste and not knowing what to do with it, we came up with like different ideas to suggest and actually helped the client design a new top that was complementary, but then we were able to use that panel for a contrast sleeve on a completely new design. So thinking through things like that, or I've also had clients come up with accessory items like scrunchies or things like that, where we can really think about how to utilize their waste. And if they can't think of something immediately, it's always good to just have that conversation with the factory, whoever that is, to say like, save this material or save scraps above a certain size. That way we can come up with something later, or partner with a different designer who maybe upcycles materials and things like that. So having those conversations as well. We go through the prototyping process and of course try to be as lean as possible during that. We have a plotter because I have to print and plot out patterns, so I'm conscious about recycling the paper. Sometimes that's recycled in my own home for my daughter to draw on. Sometimes we're donating the tubes from the material to, or from the paper, excuse me, to daycares, or reusing it on different fabric rolls internally, or sending it out to a factory who may need extra rolls. Mm-hmm. And otherwise we're recycling the paper, of course, kind of collecting it all together and recycling. And same with fabrics. I'm still kind of on a journey to find a good textile recycler for small batch. Fab Scrap in New York is one that I admire their work, but so far the Midwest doesn't have anyone that I know of. So if someone does know, please tell me. So anyway, we go through the prototyping process, which involves multiple fittings, multiple revisions until we're happy with that base size garment, and then go into kind of final sample grading and then production, where we're working really closely with the factory partner.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It sounds like you do a lot of matchmaking and helping people find the right vendors that align with their values. That's really critical. But I want to pop over to, once you release the garments into production, popping over to Teresa, tell us a little bit about, the production side of things. I'd love to get an insight on how Work Plus Shelter works and how that differs from other factories, what makes it ethical. Kind of guide us through your process and how that, comes about.
Sure. So fundamentally, I want to have us keep in mind a couple different terms. So there's additive, additive employment when you bring something to someone's life, and there's extractive employment where you're just trying to take from them. And so broadly, I think this is really fundamentally important when we consider the type of work that Work Shelter does, and other factories do. There's a whole range of the gamut here. And I'll share an example of an experience I had with a consultant in India. So I was talking to them about how to set up the factory more efficiently. So how can we really streamline the process? How do we divide what people are working on? And that consultant gave me a suggestion. And they said to me, it's really better for you as a company to make sure people are only skilled on one thing. Because if they're only skilled on one thing, they won't quit, and they'll have to work for you forever. And so the recommendation that I participate in basically modern day slavery was something that was very casually thrown out as a standard business practice. And to me, this outlines one of the main issues that we see in this space. And there's a whole, and so speaking to the range, I've been to other ethical factories actually in India. that are definitely paying people a fair wage. But they're also like, sometimes that seems like the bare minimum. All right, we're paying people well, and therefore like they shouldn't say anything. They should just sit in their corner. And to me, like, what I love about Work Shelter fundamentally is that it is about development. And this company is a company that was built around the people it was created to serve, and that's women in need. And so, you know, if they didn't know how to speak in English, meetings were in English. If they didn't know how to use computers, we started with paper. It's all about meeting people where they are and developing them from there. And so that starts with a paid training program. So we say, okay, you want to learn how to sew? Come, this is our next cohort. And there's no obligation. You get paid to learn. And if at the end of the day, like, it doesn't make sense for you to stay at Work Shelter and like carry on full time, you know, maybe you have children at home, maybe it's just not something you want to be doing, it's okay. At least we're leaving these individuals, these women, better off on their life journey. I mean, so I really care about that. But of course, there is the wage piece, there is the material piece, but really it's thinking more holistically about the human beings that are involved in this process.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. I want to touch a little bit on like the young designers, the emerging designers, and just the design mind in general. So Lindsay, I'd love if you could maybe reflect on your experience as a technical designer and your own creative design versus what you're seeing in young designers now. And, you know, what are some things that you would like, maybe some challenges and some things you'd like to see designers doing more of or thinking about in this sustainable and ethical space?
Oh boy, that's a question. Yeah, as I was listening to Xochitl and Teresa talk, I was thinking about some of the ways I try to bring in sustainability into the way I teach. And my thought about it is it needs to be integrated at every level, not like the only focus, but like part of being a good designer is knowing how to be a responsible and sustainable designer. So it should be just part of our curriculum, not like a special class or a minor or anything like that. So I use things like teaching sewing to really talk about what working conditions are like in factories around the world and how you can really connect like the choices you make as a designer about like specific seams or types of finishes or choosing textiles back to like the people and the impacts on the earth, as well as to the business case and like how you make good design that's going to sell and meet the needs of your customers. I would say kind of in regards to your question, something I see young designers really struggle with is the complexity that adds in. So like traditionally when you want to make a good design, that's complex enough, like having to understand the ever changing criteria of fabric and what people want. And it's always, trends are moving at super speed and kind of understanding this vast, complex global supply chain. And then as you try to add in a consciousness of impact and things, it's really hard to navigate at any level. I'm sure anyone here who's been trying to get into understanding how to buy sustainable fashion can commiserate with that. But from the designer end too, it's really hard and it's not very transparent. And so I think the thing I would love for them to be able to embrace is that complexity and to be able to be kind of okay with that and comfortable navigating it and not always knowing and being able to jump in and learn where you can and build that knowledge as you go. But definitely, like I said, that's something I see them struggle with. I would say as a whole, the generation wants to be more sustainable. They care a lot. I almost never have to convince my students that the fashion industry is has its challenges and things that they're not very excited about. And they want to make it better and different. But I think it's that getting to a point where they feel skilled enough and empowered enough too. I try to teach them that being able to question things is really a lot of power in and of itself, like going into their new roles and asking questions that other people don't think about, especially in regards to like, I'm really focused on circular economy. And a lot of people are talking about that in fashion, but don't actually know how to do it. So we're trying to teach our students to be a little bit more of a systems thinker and to try to like ask, well, what happens to this when the consumer's done with it? Can it be recycled? Can it? And like, they don't need to have the answers, but just going, asking those questions forces the people they work with to think about it too. That's scary to a lot of them. Yeah, so I don't know. That's kind of a long-winded, not the most organized answer to your question.
No, it was a big question. Yeah. Would you mind actually just kind of sharing what circular economy is, or like circular design?
Yeah, so I'm still working on defining it myself. You know, a real simple way to talk about circular economy is this idea that we want to keep the materials we put into products in circulation as long as possible. We want to use fewer raw materials to make new things. We want to either be reusing, like for clothes, for example, you want to be keeping them in use as long as possible and avoiding the landfill. So resale, rental, repair, any sort of business model or ways to do that is one way to think about it. And then being able to recycle them at the end of their life into new clothes or other types of high quality products. Right now, a lot of recycling downgrades textiles into like industrial, it's called shoddy. And it's like an insulation in walls and cars and things like that. And it's a good use for it, like at the absolute end. But once it's in that stage, it's not useful at like a level we'd want to wear and things like that. So circular economy is sort of a big amorphous goal. It's like a beautiful ideal. And I'm starting to think of it more as a tool to be less wasteful and be more efficient and things like that. So, and it's really focused, like I said, on like the material part. So at least that's my understanding. I think there's many people have their own versions of circular economy.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Ashley, I'd love your perspective as you know, an author, a journalist. You're doing a lot of research yourself, obviously with your book and everything. Do you have any like opportunities that you're seeing for consumers or people on the clothing purchasing end as it reflects with, you know, conscious designs or sustainability? How are you sort of navigating this and educating and sharing this with your readers as it relates to fashion?
Well, I mean, as far as the trend goes, not so much as sustainable fashion itself being a trend, but just general interest in the topic being like trending. That has, I think we all can speak to that, increased significantly, exponentially over the past. I've been doing this for like 7 years. When I started out, people were like, like, you know, producers and editors would be like, I mean, eco-friendly fashion, green fashion, like, meh, and it wasn't as much of interest. And I think there was very much the stigma out there that it didn't look good, it was crunchy, we were all gonna look like we were going to Burning Man, which is fine, you know, totally cool. But like, I don't think people understood the range of possibilities and opportunities within kind of the sustainable fashion sphere, as well as all of the different complexities of it. So as interest in that has grown, which I think has largely been seeded by social media and younger millennials, especially, who are getting interested in other aspects of sustainability, and fashion tends to be a really fun gateway drug to getting into sustainability, for lack of a better term, because it's fun. It's kind of like green beauty oftentimes brings people into eco-friendly living. And I think fashion does that as well. You see a lot of, you know, sustainable fashion influencers, good, bad, or indifferent. Some of them are doing a nice job. Some of them are absolutely greenwashed. You know, it's a big range out there. So we're seeing a lot more people who are bringing the topic to the fore, which is great. And in turn, they're bringing a lot of smaller makers who are, you know, really doing the Lord's work in sustainable fashion to the fore as well, hopefully. What I think gets complicated for people and where there's more opportunity, just the relationship that we have to clothing, wardrobing, fashion generally now, especially in the Western world, it is a fast relationship. It is kind of an ungrateful relationship. It's one where we don't have a lot of insight into how things are made. And honestly, the complexity of that insight is something that doesn't appeal to a lot of people because they're busy and they don't want to freaking know how their stuff is made. They don't care. Same as how, like, you see a lot of people be a little tone deaf or not interested in how their food is made. And I see that shifting, and I think that shift is really exciting and really positive. And actually, while I don't want to spin the pandemic as being something positive, because I know it's obviously a terrible situation, especially more so for a lot of people and especially for small businesses too. But I do think that this kind of like global pause is elucidating a lot of things for people. We're seeing like, oh shit, this is how something is made, or oh gosh, like supply chains mean that I can't get this right now. And so people are taking that pause and hopefully using it to also feel appreciative of the things that they do have and make do with the things that they do have. And I do think when people kind of take a moment to reconnect with the things they actually already have or the things they've currently been enjoying, they start to be more interested in the stories around those things. And they start to maybe even plan, you know, if they're going to acquire another piece in their wardrobe after this is all done and they can shop more or something, maybe more thoughtfully about what kind of piece they might want to welcome in and what the virtues are there. But because there are so many complexities in I mean, you guys are all like huge experts, like really living in the beast, you know, and we're also like, oh, circular economy. We're still trying to figure out what that definition is to kind of each of us as we relate to it. So within that, I can only imagine like how confusing it can be for consumers. And so I often talk to people, like, I like to educate people around the first step in sustainability is almost like defining your rubric or your values. Because for one person, something that's entirely vegan is like their kind of apex of sustainability. For another person, it's repurposed materials or zero waste, or, you know, like a business taking responsibility for the entire lifespan of that garment. For other people, it's made in the USA stuff. So it really has like, there's a pretty broad definition of what's sustainable, and it's not the same for everybody. And so I think educating consumers and getting them in a place where they want to be educated, like gently in a fun and friendly way, which is hard to do, to get them interested in why those nuances matter and why defining those value systems for themselves really matters. And it helps them to build a better wardrobe, and also helps them to find these great businesses like y'all are running that are, you know, out there doing incredible work on a lot of fronts, and getting excited about paying the price that those clothes actually are worth and being okay with paying that. Because I think there's a disconnect with that as well. People will see, you know, a sustainably made or fair trade garment or, you know, handmade garment, and they'll be like, shit, $250. And they'll hem and haw about it, you know, because they're so used to getting that instant gratification of something that's cheaply made, but really made in an evil way, like a crappy way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot of education that needs to happen, but I think the receptivity to it has gotten so much better. And now it's become like cool, you know, people kind of associate, I think, or a certain subset of people associate sustainable fashion with like their identity and having it be like a cool, like a feather in their cap.
Yeah, that's really, I'm really glad that things are shifting, and that we are trying to find silver linings in this really challenging time. And I do think it is elevating and bringing light to a lot of the broken systems that are across the board, and fashion is obviously no different. So we're seeing a lot of pillars of brokenness in the system. We all kind of mentioned a little bit about some issues or some challenges of the fashion industry, but I would love to hear maybe one challenge or something that you're currently working on. I think I was thinking about what is the biggest challenge, but I'd rather hear a little bit about one thing that you are currently working on in your day-to-day work and how you are taking on that challenge, whether it's around waste or you know, living wages, whatever those things are. I'd love to just, what is one thing you're working on right now, tackling? I'll pop it down to Teresa. Do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. There's so many things we're working on, but the something that's really top of mind is a situation I'm referring to internally as Zippergate. So one of our biggest clients is a so-called like ethical distributor. So they purchase from artisan groups and ethical factories, and they a lot of times sell those products to big box retailers or corporate marketing groups. And so I got a request from them this past week to create a quote, and they let us know that they wanted to have these little zip pouches made, and they let us know their target price, and their target price was 40 cents. And the amount that we would pay for the zipper, just for the zipper for that item, was nearly 40 cents. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that, like, this is from a company that I believe cares, but doesn't deeply understand the supply chain. And so puts a unreasonable amount of pressure on folks like Work Shelter, on organizations like Work Shelter. And so, you know, like that, like my response to that was to educate the person requesting the quote and just letting them know. And I know the person requesting was maybe more like newer to her career. She doesn't really understand like the complexity of all of this. But just pushing back and explaining to her that there's no way that you can get this product for an at that rate for an ethical price, or for the price that you want to pay. You cannot get an ethical product for that price. And so even if you go and you try to get a quote from another manufacturer, if they give you that price, you should be nervous, because that means that the standards that your company purports to live by are not being met. So, you know, we're in a tough position because, you know, we don't, like, we're manufacturing products for other companies, and our name is not necessarily on the product at the end of the day. You know, none of the products that we sold in big box retailers say made by WorkShelter. They say made by the brand, and then ethically made in India. And so, you know, it's tough for us because that same company will also say, you know, we want organic tote bags, we want organic fair trade tote bags, and we can get them somewhere from another company that will make them in organic cotton, and they'll be fair trade for 20 cents cheaper. So then it becomes like this race to the bottom within the ethical manufacturing space. And I don't want WorkShelter to be in a position where we're facing that. You know, we're just trying to skate by. A lot of the people in the ethical design space are doing so because it's a labor of love for them, because they care about the makers, they care about the environment. They're not doing it to get rich. You know, I hope some of them do. But the truth is that a lot of us are just, you know, we're doing our best to live our values. And so I'm thinking about, how does WorkShelter avoid that situation? You know, how do we ensure that we're creating margin for ourselves, and we opt out of this commodity race to the bottom game? So I've got some ideas on how to do that. You know, first of all, thinking about materials that are ethical but have a perceived higher value. Next is thinking about the type of items that we make. Maybe we just say we don't make tote bags anymore. Sorry. You know, maybe we eventually are going to create our own brand that specifically targets, you know, this one specific. Maybe we'll make ethical jackets. I don't know what it is, but just trying to find places to ensure that we're creating margin and paying those fair wages that are the reason why we exist. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Social, I'd love to hear something you're focusing on.
Yeah, I could kind of piggyback on Teresa's thoughts there. I think a lot of designers, brands, especially newer ones, come in and, you know, they have certain things that they really, really want to do, or they have a kind of large checklist of like, I must be, you know, Okotex fabric, it must be, you know, fair trade wages, it must be organic cotton, whatever like their checklist is. And some of what Ashley was saying, that there's that rubric, and we can't have all the things as much as we'd love to, but picking like what's most important to you, and also understanding the cost associated with each of those things. I've found whether people are, you know, working with Teresa or they're working in the US, they don't understand the labor component as much as the fabric side. So I'm continuously kind of educating, or like looking at a factory quote for a client, explaining like, yes, this is fair. Your garment has these various complexities. You know, if we do want to talk about knocking a couple dollars down, like we need to simplify your design in some way, not push back on the factory to lower the price. There's a reason, you know, that it is more expensive, or maybe it's you really need to make more. You can't get this price if you're only making 50, but can you sell 100 or can you sell 500? Like that's not sustainable either. So helping them, you know, understand what their decision-making process is a big kind of continuing challenge in education that I'm working through.
Yeah. Lindsay, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, listening to all of you, like it's one of the hardest things is getting students to even understand the level of granular detail or like emerging designers that they even have to think about. And then the other thing we face is like, as we're teaching them, we don't have access to a lot of that information, and like those little like pennies matter, and those kinds of negotiations are really hard to recreate in an educational setting. And so just thinking about like they come out sort of ill-prepared, like they have high expectations and ideals about maybe starting a sustainable brand or something like that, but they're at that starting point where they can't meet the minimums to work with a lot of the services that could help them make those decisions better. And then, you know, they end up going to like a big brand to work and kind of losing that steam.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest challenges just is like helping students graduate empowered to actually jump into it and work through it and not get disillusioned really quickly. So it's kind of related to what you were all talking about. And then the other thing, like I'm just personally working on is as I'm learning a lot about circular economy and things like that, figuring out how to teach a super complex topic, sort of pivot a little bit, but like where do you put it in? Where is it too much? How do you not overwhelm students with like the enthusiasm and knowledge that I'm gaining and kind of make it accessible and a good entry level? I'd say I have a tendency to overwhelm my students a lot. And just because I'm so passionate and excited and things like that. So I'm struggling with just always how to balance like where to focus on that versus the traditional way things are made. So they're actually prepared to have a job. So I always have to be balancing, like they're paying me to teach them how to be an apparel designer, and the way the apparel industry works is one way and the way we want it to work is maybe another way. So yeah, and I think all apparel educators care a lot about the industry and about sustainability and things like that. So it's something I'm sure we're all struggling with.
Sure.
Ashley, do you have any big challenges that you're seeing in the intersection of, conscious fashion and the work that you do? And are you, active in any of those spaces?
I mean, I'm active as far as, trying my best to signal boost certain things and certain topics. I think, as just a consumer and like a lay person, which I would very much still consider myself if we're getting into, like, I'm learning a lot, obviously, from all you amazing people. I think one of the things we're seeing and we're butting up against, which we've seen obviously in like the green beauty movement and the food movements, are that, sustainable fashion is becoming a pretty significant vector for greenwashing. And so, as we've seen with like Everlane recently, for instance, right, which was a real darling of kind of more sustainable fashion as far as like a mainstream, accessible, fashion forward brand, right, that people like the aesthetics of and they liked the purported values of, and then they find that they're not allowing, their employees to unionize. And so again, it goes back to like, what is someone's individual values and what do they want to actually wear? What's important to them. So for some people, like how certain employees are treated is not as important as like where the materials are sourced or what kind of pollution is caused through the manufacturing process. But we've seen even just during this time, I think a lot of the supposed good guys sort of coming out as not seeming as good as they were before, and or as they marketed themselves to be. And then obviously like some who've been pretty good for a long period of time, not perfect, but pretty good. As Social said, you can't be everything. That's just like virtually impossible. So it's been I think it's an interesting time period where even just like reading the news and how companies are treating their employees, especially during a pretty difficult time like now, folks are saying like, ooh, I don't know if I actually want to buy from them anymore. I thought they were sustainable, which is such an umbrella term. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But that term's heavily misused, as I'm sure you guys are all acutely aware, because you're really running as much as you can truly sustainable operations. And you probably see a lot of folks who get more exposure, but maybe aren't doing as fastidious of a job trying to actually be earnest in honoring that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to open up the conversation generally about greenwashing. There's a lot of
topic. Let's get it.
Yeah, let's do it. There's a lot of brands that are jumping on this trend. A lot of designers that want to be sustainable. And I'd love to just hear, the group's thoughts on how can you tell if a brand is being honest about it? Are there times when designers think they're being sustainable, but maybe they're not, even though they honestly want to be? I'd love to just, throw that topic out there to anyone.
Yeah, I feel like especially newer brands who are new to the fashion space, new to manufacturing processes, they might read something and then not get further education on it and kind of, have good intentions, but not necessarily understand the full process or why something may be better or worse than another thing. Or on like the inverse side, saying these are two different things. Like maybe there's, let's say, Tencel and like organic cotton. Like, do they have to be better or worse than one another? Are they both have pros and cons, but they don't have to say like, oh, I cannot use that, or I can't use like GMO crops, or I can't use. I mean, each issue that we're facing, I feel like has so many complexities that sometimes people can like inadvertently greenwash just because they are toting something that's good, but they don't understand the other options out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, broad strokes here. I see accidental greenwashing amongst the smaller businesses, the independent designers, folks who I believe are earnest and care and doing the best they can. And then I see the H&Ms of the world whose conscious collections I won't touch with a 10-foot pole. And that's because I don't trust them or believe in them as a company. Maybe that one specific garment, was made ethically, but I do not believe that they, as an organization, am I not supposed to call out big box store stores on here? Whatever. I'm just broad strokes here.
You can be honest here.
Broad strokes here. I don't believe a lot of small organizations or designers are trying to greenwash. And I think that it's important to have compassion for them on their journey and support them, but ask the question. And if they give you an answer you don't like, still support them so you can use your power as the person who purchases things from them to influence them moving forward. Because everybody can't do everything at once, as we've been talking about here. But I can tell you most of those folks want to be better and they need your support to get there.
And they're usually willing to learn and to take that feedback and do something with it. And they're small enough to be able to do something more quickly. Sending letters to the big corporations, sending petitions, all of that is important, but we need a lot of us to make a lot of noise to kind of get traction with those companies. Whereas a small brand, you're usually talking to the owner, the designer directly, and you can have a lot more influence as a consumer.
Yeah.
Lindsay, do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. I'd echo all of that. The greenwashing is real, and I think a lot of it's unintentional. Like you said, it's just there's so much to know and learn that, as Xochitl said, they read one thing but don't dig into it enough to understand like the full nuances and like the full. It comes down to like understanding a system. Like we make a choice here, it might be good in one way, but it's going to have a negative consequence here. Or still making things always has an impact no matter what. So you can't say that like this is a sustainable thing, like really truly. So any of it is, any made good is changing the world. I had one other thing I was going to say, and it's gone. But yeah, I echo a lot of what all of you said. It's
I feel like and Lindsay, if your thought comes back to you, please interrupt me. From a consumer perspective, not like I'm the only consumer on here. We all consume things. It's cool. But it is that kind of age-old argument of, I want to show these larger companies who are maybe making a concerted effort, even if they're greenwashing and using certain buzzwords. I want to show them that I'm a very legitimate like consumer contingent who cares about that kind of stuff. It's the same with food. We see it a lot when like a large meat company buys like a vegan meat company and people are like, well, I'm never buying that product again. And it's like, but there is a piece that like, we want to show them that we're a very legit consumer group who is looking for those types of values. And so I think a lot of people get kind of stymied by like, oh shit, like, well, I want to like support buying a conscious collection because that matters to me. And it would be a good show to like H&M, not to give them money necessarily, but to show them that they're going in the right direction. And so I even personally struggle with that. I don't buy anything new really anymore unless it is from like a small maker who I feel really comfortable with. But I know people who maybe don't have the time to research this or don't care as much or just aren't in this world. They struggle with like, what's better, to buy something that kind of is labeled like it's kind of a lesser evil from a larger like Leviathan-esque company, or do I just like spend a lot of time trying to research and find the item I'm looking for from a smaller maker, which might be more expensive, might take longer to get. Those are real concerns for people who are not living in this world that we're so interested in and passionate about. So I struggle with that as well. And I'd love to, get y'all's thoughts on what you think, or folks who are on the line, what should I do? No, I'm just kidding. What should I do? Should I buy Zara's sustainable collection, guys? No.
I'll let you know who our clients are, you can buy from them.
That's what I'll do.
Okay.
Teresa's going to
Shout out to Lev Apparel, whose mock turtleneck I'm wearing today.
I thought so. I already
Right,
have that on my list to buy today.
Totally.
Who is
Well, part of
And
the
they're in the
benefits
marketplace.
of, right? And Social introduced us to. Yeah. Part of the benefits of having factories, you get all the rejections. So, you
I love
can't
that
tell,
about working
but
in
it is.
industry. I remembered what I was going to say.
Oh, great.
Lindsay, get it.
Yay, you prompted me, Ashley.
Great.
Thing that I really wish personally the brands would do is tell me what they're not figuring out yet, like be more transparent about where they are on the journey. I think too many people feel this pressure to do it perfectly, that they're going to burn themselves in the long run, because more information is going to be uncovered. Consumers are going to get smarter. Like they're going to realize they didn't know all the facts. And so I just wish that companies would be more honest about it. And that's just my own kind of thing. And I understand why they're not, because it's not a good marketing strategy as far as all the traditional best business practices go. Like going to conferences and things, it drives me nuts when people just push forward this beautiful, nice project they did as though suddenly they're a very sustainable company, or they've given their designers like 1 hour of circular design training, and suddenly they have circular designers. And you're like, no, just be honest that like you're learning and you're making mistakes and you're figuring things out. I would find that much more trustworthy, and I would be much more likely to support a brand that I understood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And I going off of that, I'm thinking a lot about like certifications and third-party audits. I know, Social, you mentioned like Ecotex. I'm thinking about B Corp certification and sort of these third-party transparency indexes, and just wondering what all of you think about those from your perspectives, and just, yeah, throwing those things out there into the conversation.
I don't mind.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Social. Go ahead.
I think they're wonderful tools, but I think it's important for us to also remember it costs money to get those certifications. And so just because someone is not certified doesn't necessarily negate the good that they're doing. I know Teresa and I have had conversations about this separately from this, where it's wonderful, again, like to have the certification, to be able to promote that, and for a consumer to understand what that means, that it, doesn't have these various chemicals, or that it's made, in a certain way, depending on the certification, or to know what the values of the company are, like in the case of a B Corp. But that doesn't mean that companies who are not a B Corp can't necessarily be donating time or money or resources to a good place, or that they're unethical. So I think, again, just taking a step back and not being as judgmental, or not writing off someone because they don't necessarily have the funds to get certified or to change their company.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. So there's doing, and then there's certifying what you're doing, right? And those are not necessarily connected. If you want to get certified, you got to prove you're doing the thing, but you can just do the thing and not be certified. And to Social's point, the certification can be really expensive. And so we are just at the point where we finished our B Corp application this year, and we're awaiting certification. What I love about the B Corp process is that going through the process is actually a roadmap for how to be a better company. So we came in and we were like, we're supporting these women in need in India, check. Okay, we're using more sustainable materials, check. And that's not enough to get points. You got to be a better company holistically. So like as a consumer, I'm a big fan of the B Corp certification. Of course, there are all these fair trade certifications, but the world is segmented and complicated. And for us at Work Shelter in the early days, we would be like, oh, hey, designer, you want to know about our the conditions of our work? Why don't you come over? Come on over. And so that, in the early days, most of our clients were people that I met or knew personally. And so there was just that radical transparency. But now it's really different, when you're doing pitches for these big box retailers, because they want to have that checkbox, they want to have that bureaucratic process met. And so I understand that like the certifications streamline that, and that's what they're meant to be, is they like communicate something when you don't have the resources or the time and the energy to like invest in learning about the actual conditions of the work. So I think they can be useful, but I also think that they're limited, and especially for the small folks that we really want to encourage. I'm a big lover of small business. Again, we want to have compassion for people on their journeys and indicate them that matters as they grow, but like be there for them as they're trying to be better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think consumers shouldn't, well, again, consumers are confused about what a lot of those mean. I think it's nice to have them because, you know, it's a sort of discrete way to at least like visually see that a company is doing something. But again, it shouldn't be taken as a North Star, because a company can be, you know, a company can have like organic or something like that on their product, but they could be a human rights shit show, you know? So it's not like any one particular, I know B Corp is obviously more holistic, but like not any one particular kind of piece of symbology on like a clothing label is going to help. It's going to supplant educating consumers and having consumers actually want to have that inquiry themselves, do like all of the aspects of what makes a garment and a company as sustainable as possible.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Like, there just isn't enough, like, none of those certifications tie together in a holistic view of the process. And so they only show you a very specific view. So they help you if you have a really specific concern, like I care about water and I want to know that like the dyes that go into this garment are not harming waterways or hurting workers. You can find that, or like, you know, the chemicals in Oekiotex. But they don't help you see the whole picture. And so they're not that helpful from a consumer standpoint. They're very confusing. And until the industry as a whole comes together to like come up with this set of criteria and evaluation, I've been working a little bit with the architecture department at our school, and while not perfect and lead as many issues, like things that are more cross-cutting across industry, like a building or like standard that like matters and people understand it across different sectors and across different levels of types of companies, like until we have something like that, a lot of those certifications sort of are too isolated and expensive, as you already said.
Yeah.
I'd love to go deeper on that a little bit and think about like, what are some questions that we should be asking brands, or we should be asking designers in relation to some of these transparency conversations? What are questions that you ask? And what should we be asking and thinking about?
I can tell you what I want to be asked.
Yes.
So if a designer is coming to me and saying, you know, I've got this new line, it's going to be great. It's going to be the most ethical thing ever. We're going to make it out of, you know, this one specific material. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay. You know, I would love for the designers to come and say, hey, my goals are to have the lowest impact product possible. What are your ideas on how to make that happen? Because then what I can do is then I can use all the tools in my toolkit and say, I know this amazing, you know, secondhand sari vendor, and you could use those materials. Or I know this mill, it's not certified, but I've been there and I've met the weavers and I know about their lives and I've been in their homes, you know, so I can really, bring those specific use cases to them. And then that ends up creating magic, because then they can go and design with those resources in mind, with those specific materials or those specific printers or dye vendors or, you know, other parts of the supply chain in mind. So that sort of, you know, working together, I think is can really set up for a great end product.
One big thing I recommend to clients is to encourage them to go to their factory. Sometimes that's not always possible early on, but they should have a strong like personal relationship with the factory, being able to see not only who's owning it or running it, but who's on the floor, get to talk to those people, see like how they act, because someone who's happy at work is going to have a different demeanor than someone who is, you know, not to say it's all the extreme of like slave labor versus ethical labor. There's a huge spectrum, but someone who feels comfortable, confident in their workplace is going to have just a better attitude, be a little bit more relaxed, not as on edge. And you can tell that by going into the facility or seeing how clean it is, or seeing like what the break room looks like and things like that. So you can ask questions like, how much are people paid? Try to get a virtual tour if you can't go in yourself, or, you know, I've obviously visited factories, so I can speak to certain ones I'm recommending. But if I can't go or the client can't go, a virtual tour or sending someone else that you trust and getting a personal recommendation, I think is really important.
Anything else, Lindsay or Ashley, that you ask or think about when you're, thinking about transparency or any of that?
I don't know if it's transparency related as much, but I would love more designers to really think before they even make a product if it's really needed. And that's a really I realize that's an incredibly radical thing to say, like really question, like, is there another brand out there who's doing this better than me that I could promote? Am I really filling a hole that is there? Am I really replacing something that's being made badly in a much better way and trying to kind of come out of that? Part of the reason I don't design and don't work in the industry anymore is because I really felt like I couldn't say yes to those questions. And so I decided to change my direction. Other people who are continuing to do that, do it as best they can. So just from, I don't know, that's a little bit different spin on the question, but I would encourage people to ask that. And then when you realize yes, and you're willing to do the hard work to make it that thing that is really needed, that you partner with the people that you need. So you really understand who are the Xochitl's and the Teresas who are going to help you make that product the way that you really, really want. Do the hard work of going through that and paying what it's worth.
I want to touch on labor. So you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of misconceptions around labor and the ethical side of things that you often do a lot of education. So I want to just touch on that a little bit. Maybe it's like made in the USA versus made overseas. What are some misconceptions around that? And yeah, maybe Teresa, you can jump into.
Sure. So I'm personally very passionate about Made in the USA. I used to be sort of more hardcore in that I didn't want to really work with factories directly if they weren't in the US. I've come around and gotten to know more about like fair trade and ethical factories throughout the world. Teresa's is one of them, and I've been really excited to work with her with a few of our clients that are shared. That said, I do think a lot of clients and brands that I work with or just that I encounter kind of networking and everything have similar views to how I used to do that, like USA is always good and made anywhere else is bad. And that's completely false. Definitely you can have factories anywhere else in the world who are, operated and managed in a way that is ethical and is treating their employees fairly. I've also been to factories that I would not work with in the US because they're overcrowded and the people are definitely not happy. It's not a good work environment. And there are places, not that I've been personally, but that, we've heard of like the Forever 21s working in a sweatshop in LA. And like there are places like that in the US where they're working with maybe immigrant labor, undocumented people who they are paying under the table, but they're, paying a shit wage. So there's bad situations, and that factory can still put a made in USA label on their garment and tout it as good. I think a lot of the times you can kind of see that as a consumer, if you just open your eyes a little bit more, like, well, is that Made in USA t-shirt for $5 or $4? Like, is that real, or is you know what I mean? Like, you can tell based on the price usually why something is so cheap. And I think we can all make that decision to, go another way and say, you know what, I know that's not reasonable. I know that like fabric alone cannot be that price.
So, go ahead, Teresa.
Oh, did you want me to speak to that?
If you have more to add.
Sure. So I noticed that there is like, sometimes I notice a little bit of xenophobia when it comes to like made in the USA versus like made over there by those other people. And that makes me deeply uncomfortable. And I think there's this false separation that like we as humans in the United States are like more important and of more value than like those people over there. And so, I like to support local. I like to support fair trade. I think there are so many different variables we can consider when we're making purchases on how to be, or making decisions on how to be more ethical consumers. So I think that sort of false dichotomy of here versus there is problematic.
Yeah, I think another thing I encountered too is people who want to produce in the US, but they think it's too expensive, and really their problem is just the quantity that they're making, because I feel like you can find similar labor costs, whether it's US or whether it's elsewhere around the world, adding in shipping or customs costs on top of it. Like, it's similar usually, and it depends on the garment, it depends on how many you're making. I mean, there's a lot of factors, of course, but it's not as simple as just like, it's better here, it's bad here. I think everyone needs to dig a little bit deeper.
Absolutely.
So I have some questions coming into the chat box that I want to get to. We have just a few minutes left. I'm hoping to kind of wrap up a little before 4:15. But wanted to just throw out one big question. Whose responsibility is it to change and make some of these strides in, you know, the fashion industry? We're talking a lot about, there's a lot of people involved. From your opinion or your thoughts, like, whose responsibility is it? The brands, the consumers? Would love to just hear from you on your thoughts.
I think there's enough accountability to go around.
Yeah.
Everybody's.
Yes. It's, you know, it's the government to pass, you know, labor laws. It's our responsibility as consumers to pay closer attention and do some research. It's the brand to make choices on how they're going to, you know, put product out there, and whether to put product out there. And yeah, it's a combined effort. I don't think we can't afford to really play a blame game on like who's doing what better or worse than one another.
Yeah.
I think there is kind of a rolling narrative nowadays around just sustainability generally, that like, oh, why doesn't somebody do something about that? And it's like, why isn't there like a governmental regulation for it? And I'm like, the fuck, there's like not a lot of governmental regulations for a lot of things that are important. So I'm big on personal accountability when it comes to this, because obviously it's a complementary solution. You need a lot of different things firing at all different cylinders to kind of turn the ship around or whatever, but we need to start with ourselves. That's the easiest place we can actually make a change. And so people are actually getting interested in and educated on all of the many things that we've talked about today, I think is a huge step. I actually feel like that's harder in some ways, having been in politics and like passed legislation and done that kind of work. I think changing individual like mindsets and habits is more difficult than passing like a regulatory piece of legislation.
Well, that's true. And also all of those individuals that get informed and make differences, like if they would really think and hone in on what they could do in their like professional lives to make a difference, like then all the companies would be filled with individuals who are making that change. Because really, I don't know, I agree, it's everyone's responsibility, but I really think brands have to step up and stop thinking so short term. They're like, as you can see, is with supply chains falling apart and apparel companies laying people off left and right during this, like they're not set up to weather a storm. And it's just like bad business sense not to be dealing with some of this stuff and making better choices. And so it's not going to be altruistic completely, but you know, there's individuals in there who can push that change, but then brands really have to do this differently, because consumers can't have better choices if brands aren't giving them better options. I want to see more, and I want to see government make it like, I think if governments made it like, so companies had to be responsible for products like all the way through their life cycle, like they'd have to be accountable for a lot more of the process and what's going to happen to them and what goes into them, and there'd be a lot more innovation happening to make a lot less waste in the world. So but I don't really see that happening in reality. But I wish that it would.
Didn't Italy just ban single-use plastic? So all of the like cosmetic companies that are like housed in Italy have to reconsider what their products are made out of. I feel like I just heard about that somewhere, but those types of conversations force people into thinking like, well, I have to do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with those kinds of things, you see companies finding creative solutions that are earnest around honoring those types of, like regulations. And then you see companies finding loopholes around.
Yeah, just
You see
moving.
that with animal testing and cosmetics all the time. And I'm sure a variety of other things related directly to fashion. So it's interesting to see how, it is truly a combinational and complementary effort on all fronts. It can't just be, we have all this regulatory backing and companies are doing the very best they can to be as earnest as possible, honoring their promises, but then people aren't into it. It's just not going to work.
Well, I'm seeing a couple more questions that I don't think we'll be able to get to on like US tariffs and fabric suppliers. But I do want to kind of maybe ask the panel if maybe at the end you can share a link or a resource and I'll share it out to everyone. But I do want to sort of end on a happier note and just say like, what are your favorite sources for keeping up with things in sustainable fashion in this space? Are there publications, resources that you read, podcasts? What is like one thing that really just keeps you informed?
Start because I answered this question in the chat box. I'll just repeat my answer. But Kate Fletcher is an academic who's one of my favorite writers and thinkers on sustainability. She's kind of way up in the theoretical space, but she does a lot around, she does a good job bridging brands and users of clothes, like people who wear clothes. So kind of bridging that like sustainable behavior and how do you make things more sustainably. And so she's a really readable academic. She has a lot of interesting tools out there. So it's a good way to get off social media and just kind of dive into something in depth. So that's my first recommendation, but yeah, others.
As far as like industry trade journal, I read Sourcing Journal, which has a lot of really good information, kind of industry wide. It's not just sustainable. And then like organizations, I'm part of Fashion Group International, AIBI, which is the Apparel Industry Board of Illinois, and just connecting with other brands, other people in our kind of small brand community, I guess, small business community. Remake is really good. And I know they're kind of part of, they were in the earlier seminar. I don't know, I get a lot of stuff on Instagram and I'm trying to think of some of the people, but I have to post that back to you.
Anything, Ashley or Teresa, anything that inspires you or keeps you informed?
I do turn to social media. It sounds janky, but like for me, someone who's not as immersed in the industry, and kind of all the different minutia of it, I actually do like looking at different kind of sustainability influencers and getting exposed to new brands and then being discerning about like researching some of those brands myself or reaching out to them and ask them questions. I get a lot of brands that come to me as well, especially if I'm like writing a piece on something. I like to look for and vet a lot of those brands. And since that's the kind of work that I've been like doing journalism on for a while, fashion and beauty, like in the green space, I feel like I have a lot of good friends like Teresa and other folks who have been, starting their company pretty much from scratch. And I've been able to kind of like go along for the ride and see how they've evolved. So I tend to ask people like yourselves as well, like, is this above board? Is this company good? And a lot of times I'll get like a not really. I'll be like, well, shit, I guess I'll just wait. So yeah, I think social media is a great tool to get exposed to new things, just knowing what kinds of questions to ask, again, that are important to you, again, based upon that kind of individual rubric, whatever that may look like, asking those questions. And like you guys said, also reaching out to the different companies and makers and, just the appetite for transparency is really important. Like once I get kind of that feeling of like, oh, they're open to answering questions or fielding them or they want to, like a lot of times I feel like the most earnest brands are the ones who like, not just want like, are okay with answering questions, but like, boy, they fucking want to be asked questions. They want to tell you all about it. They want to shout it from the rooftops because they're extremely proud, as they should be, of what they're doing. So yeah, I think also consumers shouldn't be afraid to reach out to smaller companies, and ask people like, what's their deal, what they're all about, what's the 411.
Teresa,
for
anything
me,
there?
yeah. So for me, in my capacity as the person who's heading work shelter and trying to use that as, or like, that's my home, that's my origin point for impact in the world. I can make a decision for myself on purchasing one product, but we make tens and tens of thousands of pieces every year at work shelter. And so changes in the way that we like operate can have, significantly scaled, can have scaled impact. And so I'm getting like really nerdy into deeper in the supply chain and into energy production. So, we started to support women in need. That's great. Then we started sourcing materials that were either upcycled or got certified, or, those sort of things. But now I'm interested in like where India's energy production comes from. Geographically, if you look on Google Maps, you can find work shelter. Put in work shelter, it'll come up. You can see exactly where it is. And it is between a coal plant, a dead river, and a landfill that is always on fire. A lot of the garbage in Delhi is incinerated, and that's why it's one of the most polluted cities in the world. And so, there, I'm very conscious of, oh my God, coal, it's bad. We don't want to be breathing this in. How can we get, better energy resources? And so now I'm trying to figure out like, okay, our solar panels, are they actually better? What's better? What's cleaner? Okay, how, like, I don't know anything about this. I'm an anthropology, women's studies, economics person and then I worked in advertising, and then I started work shelter because I saw a need. So I'm still learning. I don't know about the like deep energy production space. And now I want to get further into the supply chain. So the next time I go to India, I'm going to be visiting farms. I'm trying to understand, I hear there's a lot of complexity around whether organic is even better than non-organic. Something I do know is that the GOTS certification requires that the mills, so the places that are actually dyeing the fabric, dispose of the dyes properly. So that makes me feel good. But I know that there's a lot of complexity around whether organic cotton in and of itself is better, because organic, this is getting kind of nuanced, but organic can't be GMO, and GMO might be better for farmers because they get higher yield. There's just a lot to understand there. I'm not pretending to know about that, but I want to get deeper into it. Mm-hmm. And now I know, not so far from you, Ashlyn, I know somebody who has her PhD in chemistry. So I'm going to go hit her up on the different types of dyes. I've heard that natural dyes are actually not better than chemical dyes. It's really about the water management system. So that's really, I'm kind of digging more into like data, scientific journals, trying to become subject matter experts in a lot of different spaces in order to recommend those solutions for our clients.
That's amazing. Kind of getting really deep on, specific things that really matter to you and starting where you're at.
Because the nuance matters.
Yeah.
The nuance matters. Yeah.
I'll do a quick plug for a couple entry-level podcasts: Conscious Chatter, Wardrobe Crisis. Elizabeth Klein is a great author for entry into sustainable and ethical fashion and how to. And so those are some of my great reads and podcast recommendations. So I want to be super mindful of time of everyone and just say thank you so much. This was an incredible conversation. I wish we could talk for another hour. I have lots more questions. But thank you all. And I'll be sure to follow up with the recording and any other questions that we maybe couldn't get to. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you. This was so great. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
This was great.